Hello everybody and welcome back to the second episode of our Noita modding tutorial series. Today we're going to be working on making our very first mod, which is just going to be a very simple Resprite mod, and also going to talk about the things that are necessary for a mod and certain things that you need to take into consideration when making a mod. So let's get started. So I've got my two folders here. The ones that I told you to bookmark before, the Noita folder, which contains most of the information of the game, and then the Noita data folder, which is all the game files specifically. Again, I just need to make it clear, this data folder is only a copy of the game files that the game is giving you to just look around and see. So we're going to make our first mod, and to do that we're going to go into the mods folder. And I have a couple of mods here. What I'm going to do is take this example mod. Now if you don't have it, that's fine, but if you don't have a mods folder, create one within the Noita folder. Go inside and I'm going to copy this folder and just paste it over here. And then I can rename that to my first mod. Right. So go into this folder. Now there's a bit of files here that's given to us from the example file. I'm going to delete settings.lua. I'm going to delete compatibility.xml, and I'm going to delete everything inside here in the files folder, and I'm going to delete that items gfx. So this is the bare basics that you would have of a mod folder. In my first mod, you need mod.xml and init.lua. Without these files, you don't have a mod. The game will just think this is some extra folder. It's not going to know this is a mod. So in your mods folder, you need to have these two files. Now, I'm going to open both of these. In mod.xml, you need to have this exact kind of script. It's an XML file, so basically this is just outlining some information for your mod, right? Basically the name of your mod, which I can rename that right now. We're gonna call it a simple Resprite. And this name that you put is going to be what shows up in the Noita mod menu when you launch your mods. So it's gonna be a simple Resprite for the full heal. What we're going to do is Resprite it to look a different color. Request no API restrictions, just leave this 0. If it is 1, it means that you need access to restricted API, which is part of the Lua system. Normally for most mods you need it 0. If it is 1, you won't be able to upload your mod to the workshop because it would be deemed unsafe. So certain mods can do things like read and write from the file system, do things that Nala games don't want you to really do. You can do it, but then you can't upload it to the Steam workshop. So just keep that in mind, keep that as 0, because for most mods you don't need to access the file system of the computer and access the internet and do all those kinds of things. So just leave this as 0. So again, the mod tags encapsulating these 3 lines: name, a simple sprite, description, and request no API restrictions 0. That's mod.xml. init.lua, first of all I'm going to delete this, it's from the example file. The init.lua basically runs when your mod starts. Now there's a few, you see all functions below are optional and can be left out. You can run them. There's a few of them that are important. I'm just gonna paste them out of the brackets. The on world pre-init, this is called before the world, before the mod actually loads, and it's called for all mods. Then you have on mod init, which is when the mod is init stands for initialize. So when the mod is initialized, it's gonna run, and after the mod is init. Most of those you don't really mess with. These are the 3 that you use. On player spawned, Basically, every mod has access to this function on player spawned. The minute the player is spawned, if you want some special code to happen, like spawn an item at the player's feet or give the player some kind of perk from the beginning of the game, that's when you can do it. On world initialize is after the world is generated, but it doesn't actually mean that the world is there. It's just that the world has been initialized. There's no actual chunks in game. So if you want to make sure that the world actually exists, you should use onPlayer spawned. On-world pre-update is called every time the game is about to start updating the world, and on-world post-update is called every time the game has finished updating the world. These are going to run every single frame. So just be careful. If you do too much computation within these functions, it's going to be very taxing on the system because it's running every single frame. So I'm just going to keep that comment out. We don't actually need to edit any of this because we're not going to do any Lua coding. We're only going to resprite an image. But just to give you a basic of what you need init.lua and mod.xml. The files folder, as you can see what it's saying here, use this mods for mod specific files to avoid name conflicts between mods. So any files that your mod introduces, adding new content, you're going to put it in the files folder, right? And then lastly, the most important folder is the data folder. So you can notice both of these are called data. Look at what the tooltip from Nola Game says. Any files here will override the game's default files. So when the game runs up and the actual Noita.exe has its own copy of the data folder, this data folder, it has its own copy. It's going to launch the game and then it's going to look to see if any mods are enabled. If there are any mods enabled, it's going to run all of their code and see if there's a file in the mod data folder that matches exactly with another file in the main data folder. Instead of using the game's default file, it's going to use the mod's default file. So for example, if I copy this over and I'm going to copy that over, they're identical, but the game is going to use the materials.xml from my mod instead of the one from the actual data folder of the main game. So if you want to override any existing behavior or change certain things, this is how you do it. This is why I said in the previous episode, get kind of familiar with all the files and folders and in which folders you can find which stuff, because if you want to override anything, this is where you would do it. So for example, let's go into items.gfx. Now you can see there's a lot of images for certain things, and what we're going to look at specifically is this heart.png. So the heart.png, you might notice it's the heart that you see in the Holy Mountain. Now the reason why there's 8 of them is because it's actually an animation. The game is going to play all of them in a sequence and it's going to look like it's flashing, right? So that is the heart animation, but this is the actual image that the game uses to show the heart in the Holy Mountain. So we're going to override it. Instead of using this one, we're going to make our own one. So I'm going to go to this site here called Photopea or Photopea, and we're going to edit it. Now you can use any image editing software that you want, Photoshop, GIMP, whatever you have. I'm showing you this one because it's the one I use. It's free, and it's also, you don't have to download anything, right? So drop any files here. I'm going to go to my Noita data folder, the one here, and copy that heart image. So this heart.png, copy it over, and the game is going to open it up. Now I'm just going to zoom in. Like I said, this is not a tutorial on this exact app, but I'm going to Control A to copy everything, and we're just going to edit it by going to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. Now we're going to make a few adjustments to the color. We're going to move the hue slightly to the right, then click here and go to the blue, lower that down a bit, go to the red, and we can increase it just a little bit. Let's go to the yellow. I'm just trying to make it look a bit in line with what I'm looking for. We're looking for something that's kind of green, so it's just adjusting most of the channels to get there. The blue is not doing much, so going back to master, just move the hue slightly, and this is kind of what I'm looking for. As for the yellows, we can tone out the yellows a bit and the blue a bit more, and then I'm satisfied. So now what I'm going to do is go to file, save more. We're not going to save more, we're going to export as a PNG, and it's going to save it as heart.png. Now don't actually just save this because it's going to override your data folder. We're downloading a new kind of image, right? So going into my downloads folder, the heart.png, it's over there. What I'm going to do is copy this heart.png over here and close it. So now we're going to launch the game. So remember, in mods, my first mod, data folder, there's my heart.png, right? So now instead of opening up the default, we're going to test it now to see if it works. I'm not going to open up the main Noita that you launched from Steam. We're going to launch this Noita dev.exe. The reason why you want to do this is because it will actually, if you see over here, it's showing you everything that's happening. Every time it launches a mod, opens up a new file, spawns a perk, spawns some terrain, loads in an enemy, you're going to see all of this happen here. And if there's any error, the game will also show you any kind of errors, right? So we need to enable our mod. I'm going to disable that one, and let's look for it. It was called simple Resprite. So I have a few mods. There we go, simple Resprite mod for the full heal. Going to enable that, start a new game with enabled mods active, going to new game. So now all we have to now ignore those errors. The game kind of, it might show up a message where it says ignore, crash, and ignore all. You just have to ignore it. I don't know what causes that, but you just have to ignore it. Now there's another mod I quickly want to show you. Cheat GUI, which is a mod that you can get on the Steam Workshop, is something that I use a lot. It allows you to spawn perks, teleport around, spawn in a wand, do many things, give yourself gold and stuff. I use it a lot because it just makes things easier for me when you want to run around, give yourself some, items or anything. So you're going to teleport and go into the coal pits. And if we walk to the left, we should see our Resprite of the full heal. But if you look at it, it looks exactly the same. Now, I'm going to show you why it's exactly the same. I'm going to just close this Noita dev. If we go into the Noita data folder, right? This is the Noita data folder. Where was our image? It was located in items GFX, and it was there inside items GFX, heart.png. Whenever you're overriding some file, it has to exactly match the path, and the folder names need to match exactly with how it is in the Noita data folder. So it wasn't just my first mod, data, and then the file was there. It was inside another folder called items_gfx. So we are going to create a new folder called items_gfx, and there must be no typos, because a human might be able to understand what it's trying to say, a computer will not. So I'm going to move it over there inside items_gfx heart.png. So now the next time the game loads up Noita, it's going to see, hold on, this mod is active, we've enabled it, and inside items.gfx we have heart.png that correlates to a heart.png in the items.gfx folder of the main data files. When it sees that, the game is going to know that we want to use this one instead of the other. right? So I'm going to go back to the Noita folder, launch Noita dev.exe, and just check that the mods are enabled. Okay, no problem. Start a new game. And then once again, I'm going to use Cheat GUI. I highly recommend you get this mod. It makes a lot of things easy for testing. And we're going to teleport. If we go over here, we can see that the full heal is now green. So we've essentially overridden the game's default files. Now this is just a Resprite. It does the same thing that it would do normally, gives you 10 HP and heals you to full. And nothing else has changed from the actual implementation of the code. All we've done is override the actual, spell. Now you don't have to, spell. We've overridden the sprite. You're not just limited to this. Any file in the data folder can be overridden as long as it matches the path name of whatever you're doing, right? So in this magic numbers.xml, I'm going to copy this over, and because this file is in the main data folder, it's actually matching. So it's data material magic numbers.xml, data magic numbers.xml, right? So what we're going to do is I didn't copy it over, so I'm going to copy it, not just move it. We're going to open this with Sublime Text, and we're going to go to design player start position. Instead of starting the player at 277 on the X, because the game is essentially a coordinate plane, and minus 85 on the Y, I'm going to override this to say spawn me at 500 on the Y and 0 on the X. So if the game is using this to spawn the player, we should see that we're spawning in a new location, right? So I'm going to open up Noita dev.exe again and go new game. And we're already in the mines. We're not at our usual starting location, right? So again, any file that you override by putting it exactly in your mod data folder, the game is going to see it and it's going to use that file instead of the one that the game has by default, right? Now what I did here by changing the player actual starting location, that is not the correct way to do it. There are certain things that you have to be wary about when you are making a mod. So let's say I'm going to go to data, go to the data folder. If we go to scripts and perks, right, I'm going to open up a file called perklist.lua. Perklist.lua. Open with Sublime Text. This is the perk. This is the list of all the perks in the game. If I had overwritten this file, what's going to happen is the game is going to use my file instead of the default. The problem is there are also other mods running concurrently to yours. So you can't just be greedy and say, I'm going to just override this file directly and whatever perks I have is going to be what you're going to use. I don't care about any other mods that are changing the perks. Mine is going to be the overall. So there's other ways to do it, which we'll get into later videos. What you'd normally do is you tell the game, instead of only using the main perk list.lua, I want you to add my perks to that list instead of only using the perks. So let's say you're adding a new perk into the game. If you only have your perk list.lua, the game is going to only use that one singular perk. There'll only be one perk in the pool. But if you tell the game, I want you to add this onto the list, then instead of what's happening is you'll create some kind of compatibility between mods. Right? Mod compatibility is very important because certain mods change the way the biomes look. If every game was just overriding, I keep saying game, if every mod kept overriding the files, then depending on which mod is loaded first or last, is going to change drastically the kind of game you get. So mod compatibility is something we'll work on in a later episode, but just take note of that and know that you can't just override. If it's something so simple like respriting an image, that's perfectly fine, because I know I've already checked on the workshop, there's no mods that actually change the way this looks, right? So I don't really need to worry about that, and it's a complete override. It's not like I'm adding new content. So, and there's a specific mod. We've made our first mod. All it does is resprite the way the full hill in the Holy Mountain looks, and it does really nothing else. It doesn't change any kind of interaction, but when it comes to coding, we'll get onto coding later. So again, just to recap and summarize, in your mods folder, you're gonna make your folder called whatever you want. Whatever you're gonna call it is fine. Then you need these two files, mod.xml and init.lua. The mod.xml contains basic information about the mod, like the name and the description. You need this in order for the game to actually show it to you in the mod menu, otherwise it won't know what to display, right? Second thing you need is init.lua. This is basically an initialization file that the game can run. Each mod has its own version of it, and if the mod gets loaded, it can run. So if on player spawned, I want the game to give the player tinker with wands everywhere, that's where I could possibly run that code directly when the player spawns, and if my mod is enabled, that's when that code will run. So we'll get into coding Lua in a different episode. Then your files is where you want to your own content. Whenever you are adding content to the game, this is where those files would go. So if it's some kind of new concept that the game doesn't have, this is where it would go. The data folder is for where you are overriding, and again, it has to match the path exactly. So items GFX. If I go into both folders, there is a file called heart.png, and the game is going to use my version of it instead of the default, right? So just take note of that. It must match exactly. If I had to rename this just items GFX without the underscore, the game will think it's some kind of other folder and it wouldn't know what's going on, right? So that's it for this episode. I hope you understand. If you had any questions, just leave it down below, and if it's not working, just try and also put that down below. I can try and help you maybe figure out what's wrong. Thank you.